Welcome to Big Brave Business. This is the podcast where we answer big questions reshaping entrepreneurship. I'm Sarah K. Heeter, and this is Season 3. Each week, I'm bringing on my friends, mentors, and some of the best thought leaders I know. We dive into bold, values-driven conversations about leadership, equity, ethics, and building businesses that actually make a difference. Ready to do business better? Let's dive in. Welcome back to Big Brave Business. I tried to do it differently this time and it felt really hard and lame. But welcome back. I am interested in this topic. This is something that I wish people were talking about more. Let me put it that way. So I'm excited for us to be the trailblazers who are willing to have the conversation. But before we get into the topic, which is about bias in technology and especially AI, let's talk about who's on the call. Who are you listening to? I think that will help with having some perspective of who the voices are. And just remember that our bios and links and everything like that are in the show notes or the description of the episode. So you can learn more about everybody and connect with us there as well. But I'll kick it off. If you're new here, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. My name is Sarah Heeter. I am the host of the podcast Big Brave Business, this one here that you're listening to. Thank you. And I also am a CEO and founder of a podcast production and strategic consultation company called Podfox Media.
Hey everybody, my name is Kelsey Silver. I call myself the data whisperer, but I am a data analyst for founders, and I help find all of the money that people are leaving on the table that's buried in their dusty Google spreadsheets and confusing platform analytics. But I have been working with AI and in the corporate data analytics space for over a decade, have done a lot of research on AI development, and have built my own as well.
Hey, everybody. I am Dr. Catrina Mitchum, and I am a recovering academic and also founder of Catrina Mitchum Learning Design. I help small service-based businesses create courses and programs like they give a shit about their clients' outcomes.
And hi, I'm Erica Stanley. I am the founder of Mile End Digital and the founder and creator of the AI Queens podcast and the AI Queens Society, which is committed to closing the gender tech gap and therefore the gender wage gap by introducing more women to AI in their businesses.
Yay, welcome. And if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you're probably like, hey, I recognize these people because they have all been here before and they're great. And so what a cool combo to bring together today to answer and explore. I don't know about answer, to explore the big question of the day, which is, how does bias in technology impact entrepreneurship? And what can be done to create more equitable tech solutions?
Oh, just that? That's all? That's all we're here to answer? Well, I can get us started, and I'm actually going to not address AI at first because bias in technology has always been a problem, right? Because technology is always created and coded by people who are inherently biased. Just thinking about things like user interfaces, right? So a user interface can make being an entrepreneur accessible or inaccessible to lots of different people for lots of different reasons. Everything from having a disability, but also to experience with other types of programs that are like that. If you don't have that experience, it makes it harder to do the things that other people are doing with the tools that were not necessarily designed for you.
To piggyback off of that, as we move into AI, so to take it from the fact that technology has always had bias into a little bit of AI, it is the coders and the tools that the coders have access to that is what inherently creates the bias in AI itself. And so if we take even the most simplistic example, Catrina, I loved your use of user interface, because let's think about how almost all websites are created by individuals who read from left to right. That means that the entire interface is not tailored to someone who grew up reading from right to left. Something that simple can completely change someone's interface with your program, product, website. As we move into AI, those same biases exist, but unfortunately, because of how scalable AI is, they're exacerbated. And so my favorite example, horrifically, but favorite example, is the training bias that was present in the first self-driving cars, where individuals of color, particularly women of color, were up to 6 times more likely to not be recognized as people by the technology because the training data was almost entirely white men. And so highly melanin individuals, and particularly the shape of a woman, wasn't even recognized as a person. But it's exacerbated and expanded because you're not just this individual now created this one thing. It's the entire training data is permeating all aspects of the AI. And that's one very small example of how we're seeing bias replicated today.
Yeah, it also reminds me of the example of the very first automated faucets in airport bathrooms, where the infrared technology that was created would not read highly melanated skin because of the way that the light bounces off of dark colors versus light colors. And it makes you wonder, was there no person of color in the room when that technology was developed? When somebody had this idea, oh, let's do this thing. And how do we make this work? Oh, well, we're going to use infrared technology. Like, had there been anyone in the room to have that conversation, like when that was happening, a different technology could have been used. And it wasn't. And now those faucets are in every bathroom, in every airport and restaurant. Like, it has now been that bias and that one opportunity to have a different voice as part of this conversation has now woven into everyday lives of people across the globe.
I just want to point out that they shouldn't have to be in the room. Right. That
Exactly.
to me, that is the bigger issue. And that is what I don't think AI is scary. I'm just going to go out there and say that. But I think that is like the part of it that does scare me. So it doesn't sound like learning design is going to be able to talk about AI, but being out of higher education, a lot of my research was in technology. And so one of the first kind of AI chatbots existed as a graduate assistant. And so just the way that the assistant talked to and treated similar situations across various students based on all of this demographic data that they had about the students was problematic, and they had never fixed it. But all of those students with all of those different demographic categories, right, shouldn't have to be in every single room in order to be included in these kinds of conversations. And so the fact that it just kind of is permeating all of these spaces without like really being considered critically by entrepreneurs is that's a little bit scary. There's so many people that are going to be left out of conversations as they weren't in the first one.
In the spirit of giving examples of bias, I want to add to, when it comes to training data, I can think of examples I've seen with seatbelts. We also, and I don't really want to get into like the whole space flight thing, but also the reason why a few years back, and my sense of time is really warped since COVID. So you might be like, Sarah, that was 2 decades ago. Or you might be like, Sarah, that was literally 6 months ago. I don't remember. Anyway, the space flight that had to be postponed because we did not have spacesuits that could fit women's bodies safely. That's another like example of if and I do think I like what you said about someone shouldn't have to be in the room to be considered. But I also think the fact that someone isn't in the room is the reason why people don't realize they have to consider other people. So I think that representation matters so much in helping us kind of see it, because Kelsey, you mentioned even the concept of like reading from right to left versus left to right. That's something that I hadn't given any thought to. And I think until somebody helps you see it, you don't see it. Right. So I think having people, a diverse group of cross section of people who are making decisions, testing data, doing scientific experiments and innovation and creating and building tech, I think like that's why that does matter, because we can't possibly know really how to consider other people's lived experiences. I mean, we can consider like melanated skin, that should be pretty, it should be pretty basic. Gender, different sized bodies, like that should be pretty basic. But I think there's a lot in bias that isn't like the stuff that we necessarily rattle off when we first talk about DEI, right? Like there's so many different human experiences. And I think having like diverse representation in the room where decisions are being made and work is being done, I think is like a really good step forward in that. But then, yes, once we know better, we need to do better, whether people are present or not.
Absolutely.
Sarah, I'm so glad you said that. I agree. You don't have to have a cross section of everybody in the room. Sometimes having one person, one voice in the room that's not the quote unquote default can help open up the conversation to, oh, well, maybe we should consider this and this and this. Just that one extra voice, that one extra advocate can make a huge difference.
So I come from a background in therapy. That's what my master's degree is in. And what we're speaking of is psychological safety. To simply have a slightly more diverse group of people in the room making these decisions opens up a world of psychological safety to start having these conversations without people feeling that they have to be buttoned up, politically correct, all that BS, right? And having this conversation on this podcast even creates more psychological safety. I think there's a lot going on in the world where certain groups of individuals, likely all of us here on this podcast in particular, because we probably wouldn't be on it if we thought otherwise, are creating little pockets of psychological safety to have these conversations. And while we can't necessarily get everyone represented in every room, when we start to be able to feel freer and safer to say, yeah, but what about this population? I don't read right to left. I read left to right, but I still got curious about, well, when I was trying to learn Japanese, right? Oh, that would have been really bad. I wonder if they have problems with us. I wonder. Now, I don't know. I can't speak for them, but I can pose the question. And that's also another thing. Like, I'm not trying to stand in for someone who reads right to left either. I do not have that lived experience. But am I in a room where that question will be well received? And that will spark conversation. I could be completely wrong. They could be looking at me like I got 14 heads. Like, what do you mean? It's a website. But I'm in a space where I can pose the question and start the conversation.
I really like that, Kelsey. And I think that if we do more of posing the questions as as entrepreneurs, right, that we can attempt to kind of undo some of the damage by really critically thinking about how we're using AI and how we are encouraging or discouraging others from using AI, because it really is about creating that safety to be able to ask the right questions.
So I'm curious with how you feel this has shown up or could show up and affect your specific business, like for each of you. How do you feel like this shows up for you? Because I can go ahead and say for me, and it specifically comes up for me with AI, of course. The more that I lean in to using like ChatGPT and Claude specifically, those are the large language models that I like, the chatbot version of AI that I have experimented with yet. But one of the things that I try really hard to like program into any kind of custom bots or any of my prompts or whatever is like, hey, how do I account for or like curb for the things that might come back with bias that I don't want to show up in my strategy, in my marketing, in my messaging, in my plans. Like if I'm building an offer and I'm strategic planning, I'm not even talking about having it generate writing for you, because that's a whole other thing. But in just strategic planning, like as I'm building out an offer and I'm using it as like a strategic thought partner to plan out like an offer or a marketing strategy or whatever, I have inherent bias. I know inherent bias has been programmed into AI, and I know that its responses are going to be riddled with inherent bias. And so, how can I account for bias that I might not even see? Right. And so, in prompting and in setting it up and posing questions like, Where is their bias here? Are we accounting for this? Would anybody who meets my ideal client description, would people from all different life experiences, races, etc., feel included? Is there anything that we're not considering, right? Like having that included in the prompting that I give AI is the way that I've tried to sort of like help curb, but because I don't know that I'll see it, right? Sometimes yes, of course. Like there was an example of like a reading app that tried to do like a Spotify wrapped type of thing where it talked about like your reading choices, and they had AI generated, and it was like extremely racist and deeply offensive. And the CEO had to come out afterwards and say like, I'm so sorry, we did not vet all the possible responses, and like AI is inherently racist. So the stuff that it was throwing out was like deeply offensive. And there were like hundreds of thousands of users of this app who received these like really offensive messages. And they had to assure like the company does not stand by that. We used AI to generate this and we didn't vet it properly. So I think like yes, there are instances where I would see something and know it's offensive, but there's also times that because I have inherent bias, I'm not going to necessarily see it. So trying to program that into my workflows, my prompting, my bot demographics, like that is how I'm trying to do it. But what comes up for you and in your businesses? Where do you see bias in technology and how do you account for it?
I think just you asking those questions and just you being aware of it, Sarah, you are already 95% ahead of where anybody else is. I being aware of it and trying to stay in front of it. So asking your bot that you are training, hey, where are some blind spots? What might I be missing? If I were this person who is a member of my ideal audience or a member of like if this person were to see this new offer that I'm creating, what are some things that I'm missing? What are some things that might be perceived as harmful? And how can I rephrase this in a way that's going to feel more inclusive to everyone? Just having the self-awareness and the technological awareness that this does exist and we can work around it. I think you're already leaps and bounds ahead of most other people. We have to be asking those questions as we're building our AI. As we are collectively, business owners, society starting to use AI more, we are training it. We are more in the driver's seat now than the original programmers at this point. We are all like, everybody's customizing. I hear from clients all the time, like, oh, I'm training my chat GPT. And so now we are more in the driver's seat, which is awesome. And just knowing that the biases exist and trying to work around them. So I use large language models as well, but I'm also using visual. Oh gosh, why can I not think of what they are called? But anyway, the image generation and the prompts that I'm using now, I can say woman, and I am getting a wide spectrum of different looking women. Whereas when I was generating images a year ago, I had to say, I would like a Black woman, or I would like a diverse group of women. And even when I said diverse, they all looked like magazine models with different colored skin. So it's getting better. The more that we all use it, the more inputs that the models are getting, the creators of those models are using those inputs to make improvements. So the more that we are able to drive the AI in a direction that we want, the more inputs that they're getting and the better it's. Gosh, now I sound like this like positive Polly, like, oh, it's all going to be sunshine and rainbows, and it's not. It's not. But I mean, I have noticed an improvement. If we were having this conversation a year ago, Sarah, it would be totally different.
You bring up a really, really fantastic point, Erica. Not all sunshine and rainbows. That was beautifully said. Because, so this is the example I use. I may have even used it on the last guesting I did on this podcast. But so I have a 4-year-old daughter. AI is a 4-year-old child. If AI has only ever seen a picture of a whole apple, and then you give it a picture of slices of apple. It will not know that that is apple. So it is incredibly important that we provide AI with the same kind of learning that we would teach a toddler. And just like bias is created in childhood, bias is created in the AI's childhood, but we have the power, just like all of us on this podcast have questioned our own biases and tried to improve from that. We now have the power to help AI do the same. So women continuing to prompt AI helps it see a woman's point of view. Individuals in in minority groups prompting AI helps it understand how those minority groups prompt, how they think. AI will always give the answer that it thinks will please you the most. That is its inherent programming. What will please you the most? Not what's right, not what's best. What will please you the most? So all of us continuing to contribute our own information is fantastic. But sometimes we don't have time for that. And so I like to, it's truth, right? So I like to kind of carry my own little pocket encyclopedia around. When I really need an AI to understand the kind of bias I want it to look for, I have articles, PDFs of articles that I will then plop right into the AI and say, using these frameworks, what could I be missing? Sometimes we have to give it more information. It may not be advanced enough, particularly if you're using a fun new one. There's so many models out there, right? Give it more information about how you want it to think. It will absolutely soak that up like a sponge and give you information back.
Yeah. And to that point, Kelsey, I find that especially the ones that are able to look up things on the internet isn't as all deep, dark places, right? Asking it to give me questions, like what kinds of questions can I ask you that will help me see the biases that I can't see, that will help me be more inclusive to people who aren't like me, right? And that, to me, that's the thing. Like, it's hard to get out of your own spaces and your own identities and your own intersectionalities, and being able to ask an AI that's connected to the internet and has access to, maybe fewer now than a year ago, but has access to articles and things that talk about these frameworks and what bias even really is. Like that can go a long way to helping you help it, I found.
And to get back to your original question, Sarah, a little bit more. So I'm a data analyst, right? Data, however you want to say it, which is not a typical female identifying role. And so there's some interesting bias in how people think that I'm going to do their analytics. But there's also inherently bias in the way that I do their analytics. As a female, as someone who has been a therapist in past lives, and there's a lot of interesting background. So I have to take into consideration my own bias when I'm doing analytics, but also the bias of the coach or consultant that I'm working with, the bias of their clients, the bias of the technology platforms that they're using. Because guess what? I come from the corporate data analytics I used to do. I've got every single demographic you could possibly want, but not a single client that I have worked with in the entrepreneurial and founder space has any sort of racial or gender demographic information connected to purchase history, subscriber data, things like that. So I can't actually help them see their own grouping biases, because most of them aren't collecting socioeconomic status, race, gender, ethnicity, so on and so forth. So the level of analytics that I'm used to doing of, hey, who's going to be most successful in your program? Who's most likely to purchase? I can't get to that level of granularity and bias because we're not even collecting the data to look at. So for me in my business, that's where bias shows up the most is I can do your analytics. We can do some really beautiful work and I can find you a shit ton of money, but I can't always tell you who you're not serving because we're not even looking at that. That's not even on the radar. I find that interesting. I don't know, it's my background.
I find that interesting as well. And that's something that I can relate to in the podcasting world because most podcast statistic tracking does not include demographic details. There's a lot of like privacy laws and things like that they're working around, especially when it comes to like advertising standards and this and that. But it is interesting because in an effort to protect people's privacy, we now have also lost access to data that would help us counter for bias in who we're serving and how we're serving them. And so I think age, gender, race, these are things that even income level is something that like Spotify has and to a certain degree does track, but Apple, for example, does not. So then when you're trying to look at like podcast analytics to even get an idea of who's in your listenership and your audience is hard. So when it comes to being able to measure trends or to be able to identify like a data story, it's hard if that's not even being collected. Then how do you counter for that? So I think that is interesting, and I think privacy, of course, with technology is a very like big concern. Another thing, and Erica had put one in the chat too that I would love to come back to, but another thing that's related to this bigger topic of bias in technology that isn't necessarily like AI, as we've been discussing AI, is like algorithms. So I'm curious to if we can kind of talk about that a little bit of what you've noticed and what you know to be true statistically when it comes to the bias in algorithms, especially on social media. But I mean, I guess this would apply to like any algorithm of the internet, search results, SEO, etc. I don't know a lot about like bias in SEO, so I'm curious if that exists, what that looks like, if anybody knows. But I think anybody on this call, I know somebody somewhere knows, but I think that for me, one thing that I know to be true is the algorithms on social media tend to favor certain kinds of messaging, certain kinds of physical appearances, like white female creators, white female blonde thin creators. Their content that is face forward tends to be algorithmically promoted over people who exist in other bodies, right? And I think that is interesting because even if you try to count, so I do try to counter that with like who I follow, who I engage with, etc., which kind of is funny because there are people who I think offer perfectly good value who do meet those criteria, right, of physical appearance or physical body. But I try to like retrain my algorithm by being really particular and specific about what accounts I engage with, what accounts I follow, trying to change my ratio of accounts of what kind of creators I follow and who's in what demographic to try to like train my algorithm of what I want to see more of. But I'm curious, like, what have your experiences been and what information do you know or do you have experience with when it comes to bias in algorithms?
I can just speak from the technology aspect, and then I'd like to push it to Erica because I think it's exactly what Erica mentioned in the chat. It's confirmation bias. All algorithms are promoting confirmation bias. It's what have you said you liked before? I will give you more of that. It's creating echo chambers. So I just wanted to put it out there that I think confirmation bias is exactly what you're talking about. I don't think they're two different conversations from a technology backend perspective.
Yeah, there is a brilliant woman, Kelsey. I think you have been on a podcast with her before. It's Lauren Devane from the BMuse studio, and she talks about how everyone's version of the internet is completely different. Where the influencers that you see, the people that you engage with, that you're like, oh, you know, this person that you see every day, and the people that you're talking to are like, no, I have no idea who you're talking about. They're in your little environment, your little atmosphere of your own personal algorithm. And it's, I don't know, it's a double-edged sword because on one hand, we know that we are only seeing the pieces of the internet that already confirm the things that we already like, the things that we're already interested in, the people that agree with the things that we believe, which I don't know. I think things that I believe are awesome. And I want to see more people and be connected with more people that have those values and viewpoints. But on the other side of the coin, we know that we are missing out on a lot of other voices and I guess the opportunity to hear and see and maybe like play in the gray area between some of the divisiveness that we now see and encounter on a daily basis. I know, Sarah, you had a podcast episode in season 2 where you talked about how you very carefully curate your threads feed and you more intentionally follow underrepresented voices, women of color. Okay, so that podcast episode, I've listened to that at least 3 times. And so now my threads feed is almost exclusively these badass, amazing, mostly Black women who I never would have encountered before. And a lot of them are into AI or branding or technology. And had I not intentionally curated my feed based on that one episode, based on that one conversation, I never would have encountered these women. And I think that just, it speaks to how siloed we are and how careful we need to be, like how intentional we need to be with it.
I'm glad you brought up threads, Erica, because that's exactly where I was going to go with this. And I feel like it really depends on the algorithm. Like I was able to do the same thing with threads, but I tried to do that on Instagram and it bit me in the ass. And so I really think that it comes back to what Kelsey said at the beginning. It comes back to the technology and also who is programming that technology. So it is still confirmation bias, but how much confirmation, how much does it take to tip that needle one direction or another is dependent upon who coded the algorithm for that particular platform. And I think that really kind of explains that difference in experience from one social media platform to another. And that's one of the things I really like
owned
about
by
Threads.
Meta. Yeah. And both
A totally
owned by
different
Meta.
programming team, though.
Yeah.
Yes, but then it shows. And I think it is interesting. And Katrina, I want to let you finish. I sound like Kanye. I feel like Threads is so much easier for me to cultivate. And I feel like it listens to what I want. And sometimes it gets off balance and it's like trying to suggest things to me. And I have to recorrect it. Like, hang on, this is actually what I want from you. And then it does, like it's responsive. But Instagram, I can intentionally follow creators who don't look like me and don't share my lived experiences. So I can like learn from content that isn't just confirming all my biases all day long. I can follow people all day long and it does not show me their stuff. They do not come up top of feed. Their stories do not come up in my stories. I'll think, does that person still make content? And I'll go seek out their profile and they have stories that are active that do not show up in my stories, right? Like I'm not seeing it. And I intentionally try to train the algorithm by interacting with accounts that I specifically want to see more of. And if they are specifically Black women, if they are Black women creators, then they continually get pushed on in the algorithm. That is so frustrating to me. And I am not even a Black woman. And I am so frustrated by that. Like, because I see it happening in real time, that the bias that is inherent in the algorithm hurts their ability to be content creators and to thrive on that platform.
It's also not lost on me that we are a group of female presenting, white presenting individuals having this conversation. And I want to call that out and recognize that we all recognize that. Like, I just want to be very clear. We are all on here fully recognizing that we are very privileged to be talking about that. So I just want to also identify that curating and elevating these voices also takes us taking a step back, because if I don't know how to really articulate where I want to go with this, but as you said, Sarah, and all of us have really said this, that regardless of how we train the algorithms, it is going to take more of the voices that are underrepresented doing more of the things that they are already working so hard to do in order for these algorithms to react. And that's terrible, and it shouldn't be the case. But us interacting with their content, that's helpful and supportive and fantastic. But us speaking about it is not always the help that we think it is. And I'm not referring to this podcast. Hopefully we're creating psychological safety for people. Like, I'm not referring to that. But I've noticed sometimes I want to jump into a conversation and I want to say, yeah, but what about, not my place. And that can be very hard when we're coming from a place of privilege. Really hard.
Privilege and also wanting to help.
Yeah.
right? And so remembering that when you want to help someone, it's not about you,
Right.
is the thing that can be tough too. It's about them. And so,
Yeah. Thank you so much for saying that, Kelsey. I have listened to several of these roundtables about AI and technology and bias, and it is mostly white voices. And recognizing that bias is not just race and color, but we want to help. And also, we know that we're coming from a place of privilege.
Yeah, I was thinking that earlier, and I'm glad that you called it out as well, Kelsey, because I was going to make a crack about it that made sense at the time, and then the moment passed. But I do think it's an interesting when it comes to our responsibility as entrepreneurs and how we use tech, because podcast is, of course, tech, and it is very skewed white. So the charts are very skewed white. The representation in people who host podcasts is very white. And not to say that there are no amazing podcasters of all different racial backgrounds, et cetera. Of course, there are, and also leans male. I think that it is an interesting responsibility as a host of a podcast to make a concerted effort to be very aware of how I am platforming other people, who I platform, how I platform them, and how I ensure that these conversations include a lot of diverse voices. And although there is a significant lack of melanin on this particular conversation, I do feel very proud of the effort that we have all made in participating in these conversations, especially the group conversations, to create psychological safety in a way that it is, I think, generally speaking, if you look at the larger picture of this podcast, actually awesome how diverse the community of folks who want to be big and brave about business and have chosen to join me here as a white woman holding this platform. And sometimes when I meet people who are part of marginalized groups in person and I start to talk about what big brave business is and getting to the point where I want to invite them to come and be guests on the podcast, you see the skepticism on their faces when we first start talking. I feel like I kind of have to like prove that it's not just like like this, like white women talking. It isn't though. Like it isn't just white women talking to each other and just like an echo chamber of the same experience. It is actually, I think, quite a diverse place. So, anyways, it is an interesting responsibility, and I think this is something as entrepreneurs that we have to consider, not just when we have something like a podcast that platforms other people, and considering like looking at your guests, looking, because it's hard to look at your listeners, so looking at your guests, etc., to see what kind of space you're creating and how you're addressing the bias that's inherent in your own life, right? Like, and in your own brain, but also our client are our clients diverse? Are our own social media audiences diverse? Are our team members diverse? And right, like, and again, that is a bigger question than just the color of people's skin, but that too, that counts too. And I think that is something that we've talked about on this podcast before, of like kind of how to audit your business to see if your DEI efforts are like performative or if they're intentional, and both things actually matter, being both performative and also intentional. But I think that is one of the responsibilities we have as entrepreneurs, is in trying to counter some of the tech bias, is understanding that like when you just rely on algorithms and when you just rely on tech, that you aren't countering that bias in building an audience, serving a community, serving clients, building offers, pricing your offers, building a team, and so on and so forth. So I think that is one of the things that I'd like to call out, of like, that is one of our responsibilities. What other responsibilities do we have?
And I apologize if it came across as though I was being critical, but so, okay, cool. But so along those lines, I'll just share a very quick story similar to what you shared, Sarah. One of the first things I did when I started my business is I said, I'm going to do a summit and I'm going to have open applications because everybody's going to apply and I'm going to have this beautifully diverse group of people. And I had a single individual of a minority group that applied. Everyone else was a white female. And I said, well, I still said I was going to accept everybody. We're going to do this summit. And one of the feedbacks I asked specifically for feedback around this topic, and it's like that individual of color was tokenized. You tokenized them. Now they were kind of smack in the middle of the agenda. They weren't called out as look at that. But because they were the only individual, this other person thought that they were tokenized. And I took that, right? Like that was in fact my responsibility. But at the same time, I had my own biases because I present as straight. I'm married to a man, but I am not straight. And so I was in my brain actually prioritizing individuals of different sexual orientations and gender identities. I wasn't really thinking diversity in terms of, even though that's been my work in corporate for ages. So I was all proud of the fact that I had individuals who were identifying as different genders. I had non-binary individuals. I had different individuals who were like, one of the presentations was literally how to come out to your clients, right? And so sometimes when we mean so well, we're never going to be able to not marginalize anyone, but it's constant improvement, continuous improvement. What is the next right thing? I always quote Anna from Frozen 2. The next right thing, right? What is the next right thing that we can do? And I think choosing technology that helps support our efforts to understand more about our clients, to look into their brains differently, because we can't go digging around, but we can certainly learn a lot more about them. That's one of the first steps that we can do is what does our tech stack look like from an accessibility perspective, again, across all of our biases, and start there, then start to build additional counters to potential bias. Because we also don't want each other to burn out and then truly stop serving people that really deserve to be served by you.
Yeah, well said. And I just want to echo, and I put this in the chat, but I do want to put it in the podcast, which is because this applies to you listening as well, which is that I didn't take it as criticism, but I will also say that I think we all agreed like that was an important point to call out. And I will also say, much like you were just sharing, I would like to accept well-meaning criticism, and I would like to accept it graciously, like with my whole heart, because genuinely what I want to do, and I think what all of us want to do is do business better. And I think that's really at the heart of this. And I think that really is the responsibility that we have, is to take criticism. I think that's a good one to add, like is being able to take feedback, being able to, and so not necessarily even having to call it criticism, but being able to take feedback. And sometimes that feedback is critical. And so I think that's a good responsibility for managing tech bias as well. Erica, Catrina, do you have any, like, what responsibilities do we have? Do you have anything you wanted to add there?
I do. I think as far as responsibilities go, I think it's getting easier. I'm hopeful and positive. The numbers out of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the FBA, there are more women starting businesses than ever. There are more people of color starting businesses than ever before. And so it is a representation. Representation matters. And the more women that people see doing these jobs in tech, in business ownership, in podcasting, the more voices that are the non-default that people see, the more accessible that starts to become for everyone else. And I think that with the technology, a lot of the issue is that everything just goes back to the default. And if we have more voices that are outside of the quote unquote default, and we know that there are, we're getting more of those voices more and more every day, that we are changing the narrative on what the default is, and if there even is a default. And I love that. I love that tech, despite all of its biases, despite all, there's so many problematic things that we could be talking about. But there really is a level of democratization within technology. And it is what we make of it. So I am really hopeful and feeling really encouraged, especially that we are even having these conversations that and this is not my first one of these conversations within this like roundtable, and they are not always comfortable, but having the space with multiple people within multiple places to have these conversations, I think is really, really important and gives me hope.
I think it's our responsibility as entrepreneurs to remember that DEI efforts have to go beyond the differences we can see, right? We talked about that a little bit, I think, in this podcast, but I think it's also really easy to forget that there are a lot of differences that we can't see that are going to be impacted by technology. And maybe even putting those at the forefront because I feel like the ones that are easy to see are also the ones that can become performative if we're not careful. And so making sure that we are addressing what we can't see first.
That's so interesting and such a good call out, because I think that we all unmuted. We're like, yep. I think that's so interesting and such a good point that we really, yes, we've said there are other things other than XYZ that should matter. And we talked a little bit about, like, of course, like reading, but I think that otherwise, I mean, yeah, there's all kinds of neurodivergence and learning disabilities and all kinds of disability that I think, and chronic diagnoses we've talked about on this podcast in other contexts, but we haven't talked about today in relation to technology. And I do think that very, very much matters and shows up a lot in technology, and especially with like user interfaces, which is where you started, Catrina. So I feel like, yeah, I think that is a really important point that I want to underscore as well and say, like, I actually hate that word underscore. It doesn't make sense, but underline there or highlight or emphasize or put in bold and italics or whatever. Like underscore is kind of weird. But anyways, I think that it's important to really emphasize that usability of technology and access to our communities and things like that. Like there's also a bias in, well, if this delivery method makes sense to me, and I know that's so much of what you do with helping with online courses and online learning and taking that kind of thing into consideration. But I think that's so important when we're thinking about our offers as far as our responsibility as entrepreneurs, is ensuring that just because it's like how we learn or it's how we like consume information or how we like to participate in a group scenario, considering, and that's something that's come up for me with even my sales call structure, is realizing like there are ways that my calls weren't necessarily there was a bias in that. And what I mean to say, and I'll be specific, is that originally I had like an outline I was working off of. I do a 90-minute strategy session privately with people who want to start podcasts. And then at the end, of course, like after going through actual like brainstorming strategy, talking through all the ways your podcast can look, answering questions and so on, then I do offer up, here's what it looks like to work with Podfox. If you think that's a good fit, here's how we move forward, right? And I don't just do this myself. My team does this. I have a team. But when we go through this sales process, originally I was using just an outline. Then I realized like, well, some people really benefit from having that visual aid. So we created slides. Then it was like, okay, but some people really need 90 minutes is a long time to be on a call with somebody. Some people really need a lot more structure, even though it is a structured exercise we're going through. They need to be able to see the structure and they need to know what to expect up front. So then we started incorporating like, here's an agenda, and throughout the call, every couple of like steps, or every step, but every couple of mini steps of baby steps, we're like, here's where we are on that structure, here's where we are, we can follow along, like, so you know where we are and what we still have to cover. And I think like steps forward look like sending that ahead of time so that people know what to expect and prepare for. Like there's things like that that we can do. And this is kind of more an accessibility conversation than a bias, but it's my own bias because I'm preparing for my sales process like I'm the consumer, and realizing that like there's a lot of bias inherent in that matters for accessibility and representation. So anyways, that's like something for me. I know we're like coming right up against time, but I want to give you all a chance because we all raced to unmute. So I want to give both of you, Erica and Kelsey, a chance to also respond to this kind of concept of like, yeah, there's other things too that you can't see.
So that hits home for me personally as well, because I have pretty severe ADHD. And someone said, we were talking on a different AI roundtable, everyone was talking, well, you can, made comments about using AI responsibly and using it less, perhaps. It was an environmental conversation. I said, I can't. My business will stop working if you ask me to stop using AI, because I use AI, it's practically a medication at this point, in the sense that it is a supportive, accessible structure through which I am able to manage. And I'm not talking about ChatGPT necessarily. I use an AI-backed scheduler that helps me project manage and then inserts those tasks directly into my calendar, because otherwise I would not be accomplishing tasks in the way that I need to, because my brain doesn't work that way. And so to that aspect, there's a lot of things that we forget to consider. But to take it out of me and sort of into some other interesting. So I've built an application very recently. It's an analytics tool for Instagram DMs. We won't get into the details of it, but I get migraines. So I built the entire thing in dark mode, and I didn't realize what it would look like when I took it out of dark mode. But that's like the tiniest little bias, but it was very impactful for individuals who are visually impaired. But I wanted to really give the example of someone who is building the thing and not even realizing what impact they are having. That is why bias is so prevalent across all technologies. But it's a little funny in there. Something as simple as dark mode and building your app in dark mode. Try to take it out of dark mode before you ship it. Very interesting beta feedback.
That's so funny, and such a great example of not being able to, oh God, this is so cliche at this point, but not being able to read the label from inside the bottle. We get too close to it. My input on this is just that I think that AI is making it, now we have to proactively do this, but AI is making it easier for us to, for Sarah, for you to take your sales call structure and put it into the bot and ask, hey, for all of the different people that might want to work with me, what are some things that I could change so that I am being cognizant of different learning styles? So you don't have to wait for feedback from somebody that's like, oh, 90 minutes was just too much for my brain. You can already proactively know, okay, these are the things that are going to touch for this person. A colleague of mine that has struggled with dyslexia her entire life, and she is brilliant and a thought leader, but has been playing small because she hates sending emails because there's always typos and it just doesn't come out the way that she wants. And so has held herself back for years, and now is using AI to make sure just that, like, for basic grammar, and she can just like spit out what she wants and it helps to structure it for her. And y'all, the difference, not just in the way that she's coming across like on social media and in her content, but in real life, the confidence that this woman has that she has not had because of something like dyslexia. And AI has helped with that. We as business owners we work with different people, with different types of people from different backgrounds, we have an opportunity to create differentiated experiences and custom experiences for the people that interact with us using AI, using methods that until now have not been available to us. We would have had to proactively go out and do the research and and now we just because we give a shit can now put this into this resource that we all have at our fingertips and do better with the world.
Well, I have absolutely adored this conversation, of course, and I knew that would happen because I love all of them. And I say that every single week. And also because I definitely appreciate and respect and admire all of you so much. And I'm so grateful to have you all back. If you're listening to this and you haven't already connected with Erica, Catrina, and Kelsey, you can get all of their information and their links and everything like that in the description or the show notes of the episode. Please do. And I know you will not regret it. So thank you so much, all three of you, for being here again and for having another big, brave conversation with me. And to you listening, thank you for being here with us. And I hope that you were able to take some value from this conversation. If you're itching with like, I have thoughts, I have more ways, I have more ideas about bias in tech, we all definitely want to hear about it and talk about it and geek out about it and raise our awareness about it. So please slide into our DMs. You can get all that information in the show notes or the description, and we would love to chat with you about it. And thanks so much for being here. See you next week.